On the MacTavish lands of Denardry and Kilmartin Glen is Dunad Fort. That's where we are standing now. It was the capital of the Scottish kingdom of Dariata in 500 AD and has a commanding view of the surrounding area. Clan O'Dowan were among the first of the Irish Celts to be a part of this establishment, known to be the Scots of the Dariatic kingdom. The MacTavish were recorded as a clan of great antiquity, with charted lands from the 12th century in both North and South Knapdale, this being the north side of Knapdale. The clan was seated in the charter lands of Denardry. They were one of the clans known as the Children of Collar, or the Children of the Mist. During the period known as the Jacobite Uprising, the MacTavish were, as many Highland clans, sympathetic to placing their Stuarts back on the throne, as was their right. After refuge in France, Charles Edward Stuart, better known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed on Scottish soil in July 1745. Some Highland clans were preparing to join Prince Charles in his quest to put the Stuarts once again on the throne of Scotland. Adjacent to the lands of Denardry was Achnabrek, the lands of Sir James Campbell, who was a great friend to the MacTavish chief, Archibald MacTavish. Sir James Campbell was also a Jacobite sympathiser and was very anti-Campbell of Argyll. Unknown to both Sir James Campbell and to Dougal MacTavish, the son of Archibald MacTavish, the Campbell Duke of Argyll had installed a servant in the house of Sir James to spy. This servant intercepted 4 letters written to Sir James Campbell from Dougal MacTavish of Denardry, making the arrangements of the plans for raising their men to join Prince Charles Edward Stuart. When the Duke of Argyll received these letters from the servant, he sent the Sheriff of Stonefield, John Campbell, to confront Chief Archibald MacTavish of Denardry and Dougal MacTavish, his son. Dougal admitted, these are of my hand. A warrant was issued arresting Dougal MacTavish for treasonable acts. Dougal was transported to Dunbarton Prison in September 1745. The Duke of Argyll hoped this would put an end to the plotting in Knapdale. Dougal was released with the general pardon in 1747, and upon the death of his father became Dougal MacTavish of Denardry. He later bought Lot 4 of the Achnabrek land, which was the area of Inverlusa, and adjoined the southern border of the Denardry lands. Through the Highlands after Culloden, and for up to 2 years afterwards, the Argyll-Campbell Highland troops were acting for the English government and were known as the Black Watch. The actions amounted to be no less than a genocide situation to rid the Highlands of the Highland race of men, women and children. Unfortunately, after Culloden, some Jacobite Highland chiefs joined with the victors and treated their own clansmen very badly, assisting the victors in transporting these clan members off their land and indeed from their country. It was a very dark and shoddy treatment carried out by some chiefs of their own kin. The MacTavish chiefly line, still seated in Denardry with their clansmen, were not involved in this cleansing of their own kin to suit the English government. Well, the Campbells as a clan, by more the senior aspect of a clan as a clan goes, they became a very powerful clan because they were very politically motivated for their own self-benefit. Harsh words, but in fact there won't be too many people that will dispute that. And there's been a lot of history even discussed about that. And there has been such instances they have been involved with, such as Glencoe, that you would often hear about with the MacDonald massacre. That's another story again. But you will find that even in the earlier periods of Scottish history, that they had certainly backed those in the Scottish throne, like Robert the Bruce. But of course there's, in later times, especially during the period where the Jacobites were fighting the Hanoverians, as in the opposing side of Scotland as it was a civil war, the Campbells as a clan were in fact supporting the English throne, and the English throne were supporting the Hanoverians in their civil war against the Jacobites. And of course to that end, it was really all in all a means to their own political gain. Now, not all Campbells sided with the English throne. There were Campbells, of course, fighting against Campbells. Culloden is, in the simplest way to put it, was a fight for sovereignty.
In fact, Culloden was a turning point in the history of the Highland Clans. It provided a brutal end to the 18th century Jacobite rebellion. England had been ruled by the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I, and she was succeeded by James I of England, who was also James IV of Scotland. Both countries were under the rule of the Stuarts, and this didn't sit well with the Protestant Parliament of the more powerful English. The Stuarts were eventually exiled and forced to retire to France due to the support for the Act of Union in 1707, which basically forced Scotland to accept a situation that was not in its favour. Queen Anne died without an heir, and the Act of Union, amongst other things, allowed the German House of Hanover to take the crown. This was something that the English desperately wanted in order to defeat Catholicism. For 40 years, the Stuarts in France had been stating their claims to the thrones of Scotland and England and Ireland. James VIII, known as the Old Pretender, had a lot of support from within France, Ireland, Scotland, and even England. But he never took it upon himself to really do anything about it. When his son was born, hopes for a new Stuart king fueled the passions of already unhappy followers. Charles Edward Stuart, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, started to realise by the age of 13 that he could fulfil a dream and place his head under the crown and regain the throne that was rightfully theirs in the first place, or so he thought, and many agreed. At 23 years of age, and with the blessing of his father and the support of a French invasion force, he decided to make his claim and lead the House of Stuart back to the crown. He travelled to Scotland to rally support, but along the way there was a change of heart from the French, and they left him unsupported. However, when he arrived in the Highlands, men, women and children rallied behind his standard, and shockwaves began to make their way to London. With a fairly healthy army of Highlanders, Charles made his way south to Edinburgh, which he entered with no opposition. London quivered at the thought of the Highlanders on the march again. The English King George II made his plans and rallied his own army together, which was made up of his own British troops, Dutch troops, the obvious Hanoverian German support, and mercenaries from all over. Amongst those put in charge were General Wade and William Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland. Charles and his army got as far as Derby, 120 miles from London. The House of Stuart could have moved forces into London with only a small London militia as opposition. However, Cumberland sent a spy to the Highlanders' camp with news that a force of 30,000 men were heading straight for them. Little did Charles know that this report was in fact a lie. He believed it, and on advice from his council of supporters, they decided that they should return home. Winter was upon them, and all were in favour of a return home and then the wait for spring. This is what they did. But on their long march back to Scotland, they didn't realise that this move gave Cumberland the chance to move across the country and follow on behind them. Making his way to Stirling, his men still had it within them to take out the English at Falkirk and beat what opposition they met there. However, it left his men without ammunition, and it sapped what little strength they had left. In the bleak cold of winter, his army made camp at Stirling and stayed there for 5 weeks while the Prince moved on to Glasgow. They had barely made camp in Inverness when news arrived that Cumberland had made camp about 15 miles away. Exhausted, freezing, starving, out of supplies and ammunition, some of his army went home to their families and some stayed. Then on the morning of April 16th, 1746, Cumberland's army marched onto the moors at Culloden and faced its foe. A mixture of clans, Irish and men from the ages of 51 years to as young as 13, stood in front of a veteran force of well-supplied infantry and cavalry. The MacTavishes fought side by side with other clansmen, such as the Frasers and the Macintoshes, and there were those already named Thompson. Cumberland's troops were made up of English veterans fresh from Europe, and over 4,000 Scots. In fact, more Scots were facing Charles than were standing next to him. For many, though, it was more a case of clan revenge than an actual fight for a crown. The red-coated English army were ordered by Cumberland to give no quarter, and no quarter was given. It was a massacre.